Storytelling is seductive. From awards in the afterlife, think suicide bombers, to conspiracy theories. And this stems from our universal weakness for narrative. Why do stories bewitch us? And could trading the simplicity of a single story for a messy and incoherent reality equip us better for life? Or are stories survival tools, and are they more vital now than ever? And we're going to start with Stanley Fish. Stanley, on my right, is a literary critic and a legal scholar. He regularly contributes to the New York Times and is the author of many wonderful books, including Winning Arguments. Sophie Fiennes is a film director and producer. Her films include The Pervert's Guide to Cinema, featuring Slavoj Žižek, and the sequel, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology. Our next speaker is Renata Salecl. Renata is a philosopher, sociologist, and legal theorist. She is the author of Perversion of Love and Hate, of On Anxiety, and her most recent book is called The Tyranny of Choice. Stanley, you have 4 minutes.
I always begin my course on writing with a question that I don't expect my students to answer so that I can answer it myself. That's the whole point. And that is, what is a sentence anyway? What exactly does it do? And as you might imagine, I give more than one answer to this question, but one of the answers I give early on is that a sentence organizes items in the world. Now, of course, that doesn't really tell you that much about a sentence, because file cabinets and a great many other things, including your wallet or billfold, if you carry one, also organize items in the world. So what is there that is special or characteristic of the organization of items performed by a sentence? And the answer to that, at least the answer that I give, is that a sentence places the items that have been picked out in a structure of relationships, which are finite and can in fact be enumerated. And I'm giving you here a short list. The list is longer, but not that much longer. Relationships of cause and effect, before and after, that is temporal relationships, relationships of contiguity and distance, and in terms of actions, relationships that hang on the mood or mode in which an action is performed. Therefore, what is called in grammar the modal auxiliaries: will, could, can, should, may, ought, etc. Now, all of those, and a couple of more, are the basic structural building blocks of sentences. But if a sentence is an organization of items in the world in relation to a finite set of logical relationships, a sentence is always in the business of selecting, because organizing items in the world and putting them into relationships means that there are infinitely more relationships you haven't put those items into than there are the fairly single, linear relationship you have indeed created when you create a sentence. So that in order to write sentences, in order to think of sentences, in order to generate sentences, you must be actively engaged in an act of exclusion. That is, the excluding of all the other myriad possibilities that might have been actualized by other sentences. Of course, you can then write another sentence, but you'll meet the same problem all over again. And then you can then write 3,000 other sentences, but you'll still be selecting in ways that leave out more than is concluded. The English poet John Donne complained about this in a poem called Anagram, which is, of course, a poem about the many ways that you can turn letters into words and then take the same words and turn them into other words. And here's his line, his complaint about linear language, a complaint about sentences. Quote, "In the lean dearth of words, what can you say?" In the lean dearth, isn't that wonderful? In the lean dearth of words, what can you say? And his answer is not very much, or all you can say is a single thing. And that's why he offers poetry as one among many other possibilities of multiplying the perspectives that might be framed within a linguistic structure by all of the tricks that poets use, reversals, making you read backwards, acrostics, emblems imprinted in the poem, etc. So remember that line from Donne. So a sentence is a world in which you at once create and step into as a character. Because when you create your sentence, you're thinking with it, and you're thinking yourself into the world that you are at that moment both writing and living. Now, as I indicated a moment ago, if you are dissatisfied with your sentence or you want more, then you step into another sentence. But as I have already said, you then encounter the same problem. That is, you cannot step out of all sentences into something immediate and totally inclusive. Another way of saying that a sentence is a world that you create and a world that you inhabit is saying that a sentence is a narrative. A sentence is a small version of narrative. Everything that's in a sentence is in a larger narrative. A larger narrative is simply a larger sentence. And what that means is that just as you can't step out of sentences, but only step from one sentence into another equally, but perhaps differently, limiting sentence, so you cannot step out of narratives. And so the answer to the question is that narratives have so much power over us because we live in them, cannot live outside them. Narratives are us.
Thank you very much, Stanley, for getting us off on a good note. Renata.
Stories are really, the basis of our self-perception. And it is when the stories that we are telling to ourselves are collapsing that quite often the most horrible things happen. And, going to our title, Killer Stories, we can say that, when stories, when scenarios, when fantasies that we have created about ourselves, about our place in the world, and especially about our place in the desire of the others, when they collapse, that can, bring to the end the very subject, him or herself. Quite often, we need stories to answer the very painful question often, was I desired? How was I desired? Why did my parents have me? Did they want me at all? French philosopher Louis Althusser, in his autobiography, describes that his whole life has been marked by death, because he got name Louis after his mother actually lost, before he was born, the man he deeply loved. So the man that she was dating was named Louis. After he died, she married another man, and she gave her first son the name Louis. And Louis Althusser, he said, my whole life, was sort of like a life where I lived a person in a kind of the lost lover. I was sort of like a replacement for this lost lover for my mother. It is maybe too much to speculate that maybe had certain kind of a link in an unconscious way with the sad fact that Louis Althusser, towards the end of his life, actually became a killer. He killed his wife. Now, we might actually, when the story about ourselves comes to an end, or where we stop believing it, we might actually kill not another, but ourselves. Psychoanalysts know that, when people sort of kind of stop believing in a fantasy they have created about themselves, when they stop believing in scenarios, in stories about who they are for the others, some people might, finish their own life. And Jacques Lacan, for example, says that some people, it is as if they jump through the window of fantasy when they lose, that kind of a narrative that holds that together. However, also in the social setting, stories can have a killing effect, many wars started, with the help of stories. Some of you maybe remembered how the first Gulf War started with the idea that there was a trauma that happened in Kuwait, that babies have been killed in the incubator. That was a story which later was completely fake, but the war kind of needed that story to get the approval. Americans needed that story to get the approval of the Congress to go into the war. In the former Yugoslavia, where I come from, it was also the case that the conflict started with the help of the story.